This week's video is on mounting and bases, and we're going to start with the vertical knife base. And this is something that I worked out for taking a piece of ceramics that balances but barely, and how to keep it from tipping over. So what you have is you have a knife in the base, and then you have a slot in the piece. And the piece has to balance to begin with. It will not work if the piece won't balance by itself. But what it does is it adds stability to the piece, and quite a bit of stability. It makes it hard to knock it over and get it off the base. It's a pretty easy mount to set. You just have to feel it and let it come down. You do have a fair amount of motion. There is a fair amount of motion which is available in the piece, going backwards and forwards, but it keeps it from tipping over, and it allows it to have a stable set. Okay? So, you know, that's a pretty simple base. And here you can see the slot. Slot's cut with a diamond saw. I put a little water on it. It will cut dry. The diamond saw itself will last a little longer if you can keep it wet. And then this is the knife. It's just 14 gauge steel. You see it's shaped a little bit, so it's easier to set on. Setting pins and a base bolt, 2 base bolts. So here, the top piece just sits on pins. And in this case, the pins are threaded rods that have been shaped. And you just have 2 holes in a corresponding location on the piece, and then in the bottom you can see there are 2 holes in the base plate, and they're recessed, and there are threaded rods that are attached to the interior of the piece. All of the attachments here are being made with a product called Bondo, and Bondo is sort of like a cross between a plastic fill and a plaster. Only problem with Bondo is it's really great to work with. It sets really quick. It's highly toxic. Okay, I'm setting the top on into the holes again. Real simple form, works real nice. Your location is set too. Okay, this is again setting pins and a hanging knife. And so the setting pin here, the setting pins are pretty much the same. You see, I'll take this off. In this case, though, the pins are in the larger section, and the top section has the holes so that it'll slide back onto the pins. Now, something that I worked out that was a kind of a breakthrough for me here was with these ceramic pieces, the wood section on the wall hangs on a keyhole mount, 2 keyhole mounts, and then there's a locking screw that keeps it from being able to come off the mounts. But then there's a knife and the slot. You see the slot there. I'm showing you the slot, and we'll take a look at the knife in more detail in a moment. The knife again is 14 gauge steel, just mild steel. It's slightly shaped, and you'll see it's shaped to have a lock. So you see that lock there comes out a little bit further from the back than the thickness of the ceramic section. And keep in mind that these ceramic sections are fairly thick. If you were going to hang something thinner, you'd have to put some reinforcing against the ceramic to spread the load and keep it from failing. It would want to fail. And here I'm just going to rehang this again. You can see that it's a pretty simple piece to hang. You have to kind of get a feel for where the slot is. You can use a little grease, that actually helps, and you just get it to go on, and then you'll see it locks, it drops and it locks. Okay, got to get the lock. Once you've got the lock, it's not going to come off there. And then the pins, you'll see I'm going to fiddle around with these pins. I try to put it on backwards at one point. You can't do that in this case. And then I realize what I'm doing, and I do get it to set properly. Is that it? No. That's not it. No. It is that. That is it. Okay. And so she goes back together again, and it's really very stable. You know, you'd have to have a pretty good earthquake to get that off the wall and get it to come to pieces. There are also ways you could lock it. Okay, this piece is an early mount that I made for these ceramic pieces, and it's using copper tubes without sleeves. So there's the copper tube, and you see that it just drops in into the tubular structure, which is the interior of this kind of deformed tube shape that I'm working with. And you can see that there's no sleeve structure inside. It could use a larger copper tube. It would give it a little bit better of a fit. The tube hole, where the tube is epoxied into place, is just done with a hole saw. And then it just slides down over the tube. It's a little loose though. And then the top piece just drops in, and it's roughly held in place. Now, it's not very exacting. It's easy to make the adjustment, and it basically keeps it from toppling over. But if you really knock into it, you can get it to pieces. So this is not really the full mount that it should be. It could be redone. Now this is an interesting one. The box is held on with a French cleat, and we can talk later about how French cleats work. But the trick here is the piece just hangs on the edge, and it looks like it could fall off at any moment. And in fact, the way that it's held in place is that there's a cable that loops up through the piece, goes down, is retained on one end, and then it has a tightening fixture on the other that pulls it taut, so it's not too loose. I don't want it too tight, but it's not too loose, so it can't actually fall off. There's also a lock on the cleat so that the box can't come off the wall. And here you'll see, I'll lift this up and you can just see that cable in there, right? You see actually see the cable on the back side too. And it loops around and it holds the piece on the base so it can't fall off. And that's kind of a tricky base there actually. Bolted from bottom and pins. Okay, so here the top piece here is bolted in place. The other two are held on with pins, but they can't come off because the top piece, which is bolted in place, actually locks the other two in position. So you'd really have a heck of a time to get this piece to come apart. Now I'll show you underneath. There's a hole in the bottom of the table. It goes up through the box. There are two pins, and actually there's only one bolt, but the other pin just keeps it from going out of position. And I'm just going to talk a little bit about the use of color here in the bases. There's no gold on the piece that goes up. So this is a warm black, which is actually burnt umber, which is a brown. Actually, that might have a little true black in it, and then gold. But it's to match that warm black which goes up, but contrast it with the gold. And here I'm using a white and a very brilliant red, and the way that the white is laid over the red from a distance, it doesn't look very bright. That's optical blending, right? But when you come in tight, you see that it is actually a full bright red. All right, and you come out again, and it almost, you know, the idea is I want it to rhyme with the color of the piece and not be an extension of it. Okay. This piece I showed before, and as it says, it's just sitting on furniture, right? It's not doing anything fancy. There's no bolt holding it in place, although that could be added if you were like in LA and worried about earthquakes. But the thing here is I've shown this piece on a white bland base, you know, the base that you just don't look at. And it changed the piece completely to be mounted on this furniture. The colors kind of matched, but it wasn't just that. There was something about it that really made the piece come alive. So, you know, and there are other reasons why I used the furniture. Okay, and here, I just wanted to show you that, you know, I've used this red, which rhymes with the red on the piece, but then the white is actually painted over red too, and then the texture of the paint itself is important. And here we've got, as it says, this piece which goes off the edge of the furniture, And it's the same sort of thing, but it's using the tension of the edge. It's a little bit like the piece which is held on with a cable, but in this case it's stable enough. There's just a wedge behind that keeps it from rocking and stabilizes it. That's all I felt it needed, was that little gold wedge. This piece has no particular special mounting, although I may add some. It's kind of like debatable. It's a borderline piece. It's pretty stable, but you definitely could push it over. And in this case, I really wanted it to be on that bland, the base that you just ignore, the gallery, the white box gallery with the white boxes inside of it, kind of a Neoplatonic space where the piece could just be by itself. Okay. So here, with these pieces, they wanted to wander around and fall off, so I made these large wedges to hold them in place. And without the wedges, they're really not stable. And with the wedges, they are stable. It would be possible to actually lock these pieces into the furniture by putting mounts and screws and going through the interior of the furniture, but I really didn't want to do that. All it really needed was the wedge to make it so it would be really hard to knock it over. It could be done, but it would be really difficult to knock it over. And then as I was playing around with these pieces and I was setting them, I could never get the height quite right on a base. The one on the right, you can adjust it with the wedge and you can stabilize it and it's good. But the one on the left, I just needed a few more inches. So depending on the base, I would get books out. And so the book I got out with all this gold on it, did you know that Karl Marx was a gold man? He believed in the gold standard. That's really odd, right? So anyway, that's Das Kapital, the great book series from Encyclopedia Britannica. And it just was the perfect thickness. And the piece is called The Triumph of Materialism, so you can figure that out. And then sometimes, you can just put it on a piece of furniture and it'll just sit there, and that is the mount. Or, it may be that it's just on that very bland base that doesn't do anything in particular other than hold it up, right? And that's okay too. In this case, when I get up in the morning, this piece was in my bedroom, and every day I would get up and I would look at this piece on this table below a painting from a person that I was rather fond of. And okay, this is the last one, and this is tube and sleeve. I gotta fix that. Sorry, folks. And in this case, it's the same type of fitting, but it's going to be higher up in the air, and I needed something that would stabilize it. So I used Bondo in there, and I drilled it out so it was a tight fit. And that gives us the tube and sleeve, which is much, much more stable than just a tube going up into a void. And you can see it's a little difficult to get it to go down, but it will slide down. And boom. And you'll see that I'll adjust the positioning to have the face going just right to the square. It would be very hard to get this off, almost impossible. You'd need a major quake. And I can adjust it there. If I wanted to set that permanently, I'd use a small pin to hold it in place. Well, that's it. Thank you.